Hey, how's it going, everyone? Sitting low, just hanging out in the garage, coming at you guys with another video. And in this one, we've got a 2003 Yamaha TT-R 225. Now, this bike actually belongs to a good friend of mine. He bought the bike used in about 2018, and he also has a couple of the TT-R 125s that his kids ride. But anyway, like I was saying, he bought the bike used in about 2018, and it's always been a good running, reliable bike for him until the other day. He said he was riding it around the yard, and he said he had been riding it around the yard all day pretty much, and he had shut the bike off to go inside and do a couple of things. And when he came outside to resume riding, he said he hopped on the bike, tried to start it, and he said the bike just would not start whatsoever. He said he would just crank and crank and crank, and the bike wouldn't even sputter. So he's not the most mechanically inclined person when it comes to these kind of things, so he gave me a call that afternoon and asked me if I had any ideas. So I gave him a couple of things that he could check over or report back, and he more or less reported back to me that the bike doesn't seem to be getting any spark at the moment. So he asked me if I can look it over, do a little bit of testing and diagnosing, and see if maybe we can determine what's wrong with it, and also see if we can go about getting this thing back up and running for him again. So I figured I would include you guys along in the journey because I know some of you guys out there also have these TT-R 225s. And this is also the same bike as like the XT 225 and the Yamaha Sera, although those are the more street legal. This is more of a trail oriented bike, but they're basically the same bikes. And not to mention, a lot of the procedures I'm going to be doing in this video are pretty universal when it comes to diagnosing and testing a no spark condition. So with that being said, I figured I would include you guys along in the journey. So I guess the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull the spark plug out and actually confirm and see if we're getting any spark or not. So without further ado, let's get to it. All right, so to test for spark, if you don't have a spark tester, what you can do is you can take the spark plug out of the cylinder head, stick it back into the spark plug cap, and then ground the tip of the spark plug to the cylinder head or anywhere you know that the engine is grounded. And then crank the engine over, and if you have any spark, you'll actually see it sparking. So I'm gonna go ahead and crank the engine over and see if we're actually getting any spark or not. Okay, I am not seeing any spark whatsoever. And I'm definitely smelling fuel coming out of the spark plug hole. So it is definitely getting fuel, but it is definitely not getting spark. So I guess it's time to dig a little bit deeper now and figure out why it's not getting any spark. All right, so all the switches and the stuff that I need to check is pretty much located underneath here. The coil is underneath the gas tank, and the main switch is pretty much under the front panel there. So basically what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and strip this thing down and go ahead and take the seat off, take the side cover off, remove the gas tank as well, and that front cover as well. And that'll pretty much just give me open access to any of the electrical components that I need to check, and it'll just make it much easier for me to probe around and work and stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and strip this thing down real quick. All right, so now that we got the bike all pretty much stripped down, it'll just allow us to gain access to anything that we may need to test or get at, you know, and just inspect everything just so much easier than having the gas tank, the seat, and all the plastics on it. So with that being said, let's go ahead and proceed further with, I guess first off, let's just give it a good visual inspection. Obviously, somebody's been monkeying with this thing before because I can tell you that this is definitely not a factory option. But anyway, here, you know, we've installed the battery tender plug so we can just quickly plug it in, which whatever that is, what it is. But it doesn't appear that anything has really been monkeyed with. I don't see any like obvious things jumping out at me as far as like poor bad connections or anything like that. So I guess the next thing we can go ahead and start working on is trying to just kind of systematically go through it and figure out what's what. I know that these bikes are kind of notorious for having a ignition, like key ignition failure issues, so we can go ahead and start testing all that sort of stuff and just kind of go through and just, like I said, just kind of systematically start testing and eliminating possibilities as to why the bike isn't getting any spark. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm gonna grab my multimeter off the bench and I'll be right with you. All right, so one of the first things I'm gonna start checking is I'm just gonna go through all these switches and stuff up here, all these connections up here, just to make sure they're all functioning and working as they're supposed to. I got my multimeter. Now anytime you touch the leads together, anytime there's any kind of continuity, you'll hear the meter make an audible beeping sound, which you hear right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start unplugging some of these connectors here. All right, so we know that this end of the connector, which would be the female end of the connector, is the actual connector going to the ignition itself. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start kind of poking around and testing. Right now the ignition is off. Getting nothing there. I'm getting nothing there. That was just me accidentally touching my leads together. So nothing there, nothing there. So I'm gonna go ahead now and turn the key on into the on position and see if we get any continuity through the switch. All right, that seems to be working. That seems to be working. Key off again. We're getting nothing. We're getting nothing. Key on again. Continuity. We're getting continuity through the ignition switch, so we know that our actual key ignition switch is functioning and good, so we can go ahead and cross that off the list. Let's go over here to, I believe this would be the on-off run switch as well as the start button. Go ahead and plug this connector here. You can tell that this end of the plug is obviously going to the switch. So let's go ahead. This one might be tricky. I might need 2 hands for this one, or 3 hands for this one. So I'm getting nothing there. I'm getting nothing at the other 2 terminals either. And that is with the run switch in the off position. Let's go ahead and turn the run switch into the on position. Go ahead and check again. So we're getting nothing from that one, so that one is probably for the start button. And we are getting continuity through those 2. So let's go ahead and turn the run switch off again and test again. We're getting nothing. Run switch on. We're getting continuity. So let's go ahead and I guess check these other 2 terminals here, which I'm betting are going to the actual start button. Let's try it out here. All right, so that's the start button. On, off, on. So we know that our start button and our on-off run switch was good, and our ignition switch is functioning, and everything is good with these 2 plugs. While we're here, we might as well check this. This is a safety switch for the clutch. And basically what this switch does is it prevents the bike from being able to start while it's in gear without the clutch being pulled in. So let's go ahead and test this guy out here. All right, so I got both leads in there and squeeze the clutch. All right, clutch in, clutch out, clutch in, clutch out. So we know that all of our switches, the clutch safety switch is functioning just fine. The on-off run switch is functioning just fine, as well as our keyed ignition switch is functioning just fine. So I guess we can move on, and now that we've eliminated these 3 possibilities, we can go ahead and start poking and prodding around and figuring out what else we can determine. I guess what we could start testing next was, I know that these bikes also have a, it's almost like a neutral safety switch that's like down here somewhere. So I'm gonna have to find where the leads to that go, and I'm gonna have to test that switch, which I'm assuming it works because, you know, when the bike is in gear and you hit the start button, it doesn't crank unless you squeeze the clutch in. So I'm assuming that switch is just fine, but it's just something else we can test while we're in here, and it doesn't take long at all. So, all right guys, so doing a little bit of investigating, I was able to determine that this connector here with this sky blue wire, which they refer to it as the manual. They call it sky blue is the color of the wire. But this is the wire for the neutral safety switch. So again, with our continuity tester, let's go ahead and this would be the connector going to the switch itself. This is the connector going from the switch to the wherever it goes. So it says to test one end into the lead, then go to direct ground, which obviously we got direct ground. Now let's go ahead and put it in gear. All right, with the bike in gear, we've got nothing. Let's go ahead and put it back in neutral. Back in neutral, in gear, neutral, gear, neutral. So we know that our neutral safety switch, or whatever they want to refer to it as in this case, is functioning as well. So like I said, this is looking more and more like some kind of a ignition coil or a stator failure, or even the last step, I guess, if we've tested the coil and the stator, if those things test out to be fine, then we know that it is likely something with our CDI box. All right, you guys, so continuing on with our process of elimination, we're gonna go ahead and test this main relay here. And this main relay pretty much is here to complete the circuit once all the safety switches and everything, once the safety switches and all those circuits are closed, it allows this main relay to activate once the key is on and allows the current to pass through to start the bike up and all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and let's try to find ourselves a good ground. And that's going straight to the battery ground, so we know that's a good ground. Now we can go ahead and back probe this and see if we're getting any voltage through it. All right, now when I turn the key on, I can actually audibly and physically feel it clicking in my hand. You can hear it clicking and feel it clicking, so let's go ahead and just check it. 12.4 on that side, 12.4 on that side. Let's go ahead and turn the key off. Key off, we're getting nothing. Key on, 12.4. What do we got over here? 12.4 on this side. Trying to hold it. All right. 12.4. Key off. Nothing. Key on. All right. I'm assuming that this is the ground. Yep. So we know that this main relay is functioning perfectly fine as well, even though this connector has definitely seen better days. We know that this is functioning as it should be. All right, you guys, since we've determined that all of our switches and all of our connections are good, we've determined that our main relay is also functioning good as well. It's starting to look more and more like it's something with either the ignition coil or the stator, or even worst case scenario, the CDI box. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna pull this ignition coil off of the bike, take it over to our test bench and run some tests on that and see if that thing's working good. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull that off the bike real quick. So luckily for me, I happen to have a service manual for this particular bike that I'm working on, and it's also for an XT225, but either way, any bike that you're working on, it's really nice to have the service manual, because when it comes to testing like stators and ignition coils and stuff where you need to know specific resistance values, this book is really, going to tell you everything you need to know. This book will literally help you rebuild the entire engine and the entire bike for that matter. But anyway, in the ignition system here, gives a breakdown of all the components, where they're located, gives you a couple diagrams, and it also gives you like a 13-step process of elimination that you go down, that you work down if you're not getting any spark or anything like that. So anyway, like I said, any bike that you guys are working on, pick one of these up. Some of them are expensive. Some of them you can literally just print them out online. Like this one was just printed out online, I believe. So they're very useful bits of information. I figured I would include that, so moving on. All right, so I went and pulled the coil off the bike, and according to the service manual here, we're supposed to get a primary coil resistance reading. Now there's two coils in here. There's a primary coil and then a secondary coil. And if you measure the resistance in the primary coil, you're supposed to get a resistance reading of 0.56, between 0.56 and 0.84. So let's go ahead and click on our meter and see what we get. So it says to hook up the positive lead to the small terminal and the negative lead to the... We're about 0.6, so that tells me our primary coil is good. To test the secondary coil, it says connect the pocket tester to the ignition coil, tester lead, spark plug lead, and then negative lead to the body earth, which would be one of these grounds here. So it's telling us to go ahead and remove the spark plug cap. Alright, now let's go ahead and test it. Now it says to stick the positive lead into the end of the spark plug wire here, and then negative lead to the body earth. As you can see, we are getting absolutely no reading whatsoever, no matter what we do. We know that our meter is working. We're getting no resistance whatsoever from our secondary coil winding. So that leads me to believe that this ignition coil is in fact shot and not allowing the engine to spark. Alright, so doing some further testing on this coil, I'm going to go ahead and test like everything. I'm going to test the wire, I'm going to test the cap, test the coil again without the wire on it. So let's go ahead and see if the wire is any good. Maybe there's a break in the wire. Who knows? Nope, we know that our wire is good, so let's go ahead and check this cap again. It says we're supposed to get a reading of 10,000 ohms, but this cap is kind of sus. Like I said, we're only getting a reading of about 6.5 thousand ohms out of the suggested 10, but we are getting a reading, so maybe that cap is good. Let's go ahead and test the primary coil again. You know, fourth, fifth time's a charm, right? 0.6. So we're in spec on the primary. Now let's go ahead and check the secondary without the wire and see if we get anything. And I'm going straight to the lead, and I'm getting absolutely nothing whatsoever out of the secondary. So I'm gonna go ahead and say the coil is bad. Alright, so just to show you guys what a good ignition coil tests out like, I went ahead and removed this coil from a running bike. This is a known good coil. Now this is not the exact coil we're testing for, so the resistance values are going to be different. But I just want to demonstrate how we'll get a reading through our primary and our secondary coil. So let's go ahead and give this a test here. Testing the primary, we got about 0.4, so we are getting a reading through our primary. Now let's go ahead and test our secondary. Now it says the negative to the body earth, positive into the spark plug boot. Now remember, the spark plug boot has a resistance reading itself of about 10,000 ohms. So we're going to go ahead and add that to our equation. And as you can see, we're getting a reading of about 18.9 thousand ohms. So that is, if your ignition coil is good, you should get a reading on both ends. And like I said, this is a known to be good ignition coil, so I just wanted to show you that. All right, guys, let's go ahead and just keep testing stuff while we are currently in the testing spirit. Armed with our service manual and our trusty multimeter in hand, let's go ahead and try to get some readings from this stator connection. And it says the charge coil. Disconnect the charge coil coupler from wire harness, connect pocket tester, step 1, step 2, between the brown wire and the green wire. So if we analyze our connector here, we got a brown wire, a green wire, and a yellow wire, which are all indicated here by the service manual. Alright, so according to the service manual, it says that between this brown wire and this green wire, we should get a reading of in between 584 and 876 ohms. So let's go ahead and see if we can get a grip on some of these and do some probing and some testing. I'm getting absolutely no reading whatsoever. Yeah, I'm getting absolutely nothing out of that. And I'm definitely going to the brown and the green wire. Why am I getting anything? Brown wire, green wire. I'm getting absolutely nothing out of that. So far, nothing out of the... See my meter going crazy? That's just my, your body has a natural resistance in it, so whenever you touch the leads at the same time, you're gonna, get some interference. So it's always best when you're touching and probing stuff not to have your fingers touching the probes anywhere or the leads. So like I said, here we go again, testing it for the third time. We're getting absolutely nothing out of our charge coil. So, and it says to check the yellow wire to the frame ground. So let's go ahead and find our good ground again, which was right here. Just to make sure we got a good ground. Let's go ahead. So we know we got a good ground. It says we should get between 20 and 30 ohms out of this yellow wire, so go probing the yellow wire, and once again I'm getting absolutely nothing out of this. So what is going on? It's awfully strange that the secondary coil and the stator is not testing good. So yeah, I have no idea. But anyway, you see it with your own eyes, and you're sitting here with me testing this stuff, so it's your fault. No, I'm just joking, but like I said, according to the manual, we're supposed to get some kind of reading, and as you can see, we're getting absolutely nothing out of this thing. So perhaps the stator is bad too? It's just weird. Alright you guys, so the last thing we need to check as far as our ignition system is concerned is our pulsar coil. Now our pulsar coil is the coil that's mounted on the outside of the flywheel, and every time the flywheel makes a pass, it pretty much sends the signal to the CDI box and tells the CDI box when to fire the ignition coil. So anyway, that is this red and this white wire here, and according to our service manual, we're supposed to be getting a resistance reading of in between 656 and 984 ohms. So let's go ahead and test here. It says the positive lead of the tester to the red wire. So let's go ahead and try to get this going on here. Let's see what we got. As you can see, we're getting a reading of about 820 ohms, which is right within spec of what our service manual is calling for. As I stated, our manual is calling for a resistance reading of in between 656 and 984. So we are right at 820, so that tells me that our pulsar coil is still good. Alright, so after we tested our stator, we realized that our stator is reading all sorts of out of whack. So I'm going to go ahead and peel the stator cover off and visually inspect and see if there's anything noticeably wrong going on inside there. So the stator is located behind this engine cover here, so I'm going to go ahead and remove it. But before I can remove that, I have to go ahead and pull the skid plate off, possibly remove this shifter, and possibly remove this chain guard as well. So I'm going to go ahead and peel that stuff apart, and we're going to go ahead and inspect behind the cover and see what's hiding behind door number 1. And lucky number 3. Alright, so we got the stator on the bench, and as you can see, there's visibly nothing out of the ordinary. None of these windings look all charred or black or burnt. This isn't all exploded or melted or anything like that, neither is the pickup coil, or the pulsar coil, whatever you want to refer to that as. But like I said, it ain't testing out right. So I figure while we got it here on the bench, let's go ahead and test it again. Like I said, our charging circuits for the battery, those are all testing out just fine. And that would be these 3 white wires here. Getting a reading of 7 ohms, 0.7 ohms. Jump over to the next one. 0.7, 0.7. Switch these around. 0.7, 0.7. 0.7. So these windings are good. But when it comes to testing this coil and this coil here, let's go ahead and, this is the charge coil here, so let's go ahead and test that. And it says we're supposed to be getting a reading of, like I said, between 584 and 876 ohms between the brown and the green wires. So let's go ahead and probe and test those again with the thing off of the bike and on the bench. And as you can see, we're getting absolutely nothing. So that leads me to believe that there is a break in the winding somewhere in that coil there. And then it says we're supposed to be getting ground from this yellow wire. It says that if we test the yellow wire to the direct ground, we're supposed to be getting somewhere between 20 and 30 ohms of resistance. And again, we're getting absolutely nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and have my buddy order a new stator as well as a new ignition coil. These can be had online for typically between, you can get them for like 30 bucks, or you can spend up to 300 on them for an OEM part. As far as the ignition coil goes, I believe those are about, I don't know, 10, 15, maybe 20 bucks. And since this cap was reading out of spec as well, I'm going to have him order another cap as well. When we get all that stuff here, we're going to go ahead and reassemble this puppy and get her going. So, all right, so here we are about a week later. We had a box of parts show up. Got a new stator, a new spark plug boot, and a new ignition coil. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and just take a couple of readings, because as you remember, when we tested the original stator, we were getting pretty much open lines from everything. So consulting with our service manual, between the brown and the green lead, we should see a resistance reading of between 584 ohms and 876 ohms. So let's go ahead and just give that a quick test and see what shows up between the brown and the green. All right, it says positive lead to the brown, which I'm sure it really doesn't matter. Ultimately, it's just a big coil of wire in there. So kind of tricky to do. 795 ohms. So we are in spec on the new stator. Now I'm going to go ahead and just measure the same resistance on the old stator. I'm going to go exactly to the brown and the green wire, just as I just did the new stator, and we'll see what kind of reading we get. And as you can see, we are getting an open line connection, so that is no bueno. So I'm going to go ahead, install this into here, which is just a matter of removing a couple of screws here. Now I believe these screws are Loctited in here, because when I was trying to wrestle these guys free, you know, a week ago when I initially took this thing apart, I had to put in some might to get these screws free. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and switch this coil into that one, or that stator into that one, and we'll go on from there. Alright you guys, so we got the new stator put in. Everything's good to go there. The wire is all tucked up and hidden away. Made sure the screws are locked tight and everything's snugged and locked down really good. So I guess we can go ahead and just get this put back onto the bike and then go on from there. Alright, so on top of ordering the stator, the ignition coil, and the boot, I also had him order a brand new case gasket as well. Just because anytime you crack open an engine case, granted we were able to save the gasket from it when we were removing it, but trying to go for a no leaks kind of thing. This is not my bike. This bike belongs to a friend of mine, and I don't want to return it to him pouring oil all out of the side, which I suppose leaking oil is better than a non-running bike. Running and leaking oil is better than non-running, but I'd like to return it to him non-leaky if I can. I'm going to remove this duder here. If you remember when we disassembled it the first time, these screws here in the alignment dowels, whatever you want to call those pins there, were the longest. So we're going to pull these out and set these aside. So I'm going to leave those alignment dowels in there. They are removable, but I'm going to, you can see, you can just pull them right out, but I'm going to use them to align our gasket. Like I said, anytime you're working on an engine or anything that contains fluid that utilizes one of these like paper style gaskets, it's always, I would say, within your best interest to replace it whenever. Alright, that appears to be the correct orientation. Let's go ahead and try to line it up with our dowels. Okay. I think I'm going to put a little dab of grease on it. Actually, yeah, I'm going to put a little dab of grease on it, see if it'll stick to that. Yeah, buddy. That way that little dab of grease ain't gonna hurt nothing, and it'll help hold our gasket in place. So we'll just make sure everything's all clean and lined up correctly. And we'll go ahead and try to very carefully put our stator cover back on. As you can see, it just more or less pulled itself right on there. You gotta remember the flywheel's a big giant magnet, so I gotta route these the correct way as well. And we'll start off with the two longest ones that went into the dowels. Just slowly work my way around. I like to start hand threading all of these. That way if you're threading them in by hand, you know that you're not just stripping them out. You're just going to work your way around and one hiding under there. Make sure you don't forget about him. Snuggly wuggly. Alright, snuggly. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and hook up this here. And this is the neutral safety switch wire. So I'm going to go ahead and route these, kind of start fishing these up to where they need to go. All right, so now with our stator installed and our wires ran up to where they need to go, we can go ahead and reconnect all that stuff. So remember, this wire went into the sky blue, and that's even what the manual called it. It called it a sky blue wire. And when you're doing this, be considerate of like other wires and cables and stuff in the vicinity. So I mean, you don't want to just have things wrapped around and twisted all over and everything just weird. So just be considerate of that. Okay, 2-pin connector. Alright. And that appears to be a one-way connector as well. Make sure, yep. Alright, so just like that, we've got our brand new stator installed. Now we can go ahead and work on this ignition coil here. Alright. Get this duder installed here. Like I said, I almost think the ignition coil was replaced before, because when I pulled that working ignition coil off that bike that I had to show you guys what a good coil tests out, like you could definitely see a difference in like quality. And I know that the one I took off the bike was from the factory. The bike had never been taken apart. You could see like the part numbers printed on it and this and that. It just had a much more quality feel to it than the one that came off of this bike. Alrighty, boys and girls. So there we have it, a brand new ignition coil installed on the bike. Just gonna plug our trigger wire in. This orange wire is the signal from the CDI box, which tells it when to fire. I don't like how they have this thing routed. Like I said, that's another reason why I think this is a different cap and a coil. So, and here's another thing: the new ignition coil needs the cap on it. See how this spark plug doesn't have the round cap on it? So we're gonna need that off of another plug for this to work. So I'm gonna go ahead and find one of these caps for the spark plug. Hopefully I've got one laying around. All right, guys. So I was able to find a cap for our spark plug. So now our new spark plug cap will work. So I guess the only thing left to see now is, do we actually, after all of this, if I can just get this thing to prop up in a manner to where it'll stay propped, do we have spark? So I'm gonna turn the lights off. All right, so let's see if we've got spark now. I don't know about you guys, but I saw a pretty bright blue spark. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and put this puppy back together. And see if it runs. Alright, so we got the bike 100% back together, and we replaced the stator, the ignition coil, and the spark plug cap and boot, and we also put a new spark plug in it. Now let's go ahead and see if this thing will fire now that we've got it all back together. So she runs. Alright guys, so we finally got the bike all back together, and as you can hear, the thing fired right up. It's a little cold-blooded, which is to be expected from these TT-Rs. I had one of these many years ago, and you had to start it and ride around pretty much for the first minute or two with the choke on before you could finally close it down all the way. But you know, other than that, it's definitely you know, it sounds good, it runs good, and it's definitely in a lot better shape than it was when it first showed up here. So my buddy should be really happy about that, that we finally got his bike running for him. Now he'll be able to take it out in the woods and go play around and trail ride with his kids and stuff like that, which is you know, summertime here in Michigan, we only have very limited time to do stuff like that. So he's going to be very excited when I call him and tell him that I got his bike back up and running for him. So anyway, like I said, you guys, I would have really liked to have done this as kind of like a process of elimination, and meaning replace the stator first, then test to see if it ran, then test the coil, you know, do all that. But in our initial testing, we determined that the charge coil in the stator was bad, and we also determined that our secondary winding in our ignition coil was bad. So between those two parts, he's got about 50 bucks into, you know, the ignition coil, the stator, and you know, between the spark plug boot, which was another $5, and then the gasket to seal it all up. So he's probably got, you know, maybe 60 bucks into this whole repair. So when I call him and tell him I got his bike up and running, he's going to be very happy about that. So anyway, I appreciate you guys sticking through and, you know, watching this video, and hopefully, you know, if you guys are having trouble with your, you know, TT-R 225 or your XT 225, you know, maybe this will help shed some light on like how to diagnose and go about testing and, you know, go about fixing this problem, you know, because if it hadn't have been any of those components, the last step would have been the CDI box, which the CDI box is like a $200 and some part. So like I said, we tested the stuff that we could test, determined what was bad, and we replaced what we determined was bad. And as you can see, we've got the bike up and running. So anyway, I think that's going to do it for this one, you guys. You know, I got a lot of irons in the fire at this point in time, but this is just one thing that I wanted to get done because, like I said, this bike doesn't belong to me. It belongs to a good friend of mine, and we just got his two sons a couple of TT-R 125s, so he's really wanting to get out in the woods and go race around with his kids on this bike. So I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up, and I'll give him a call and let him know that his bike is done. And until the next one, I appreciate you guys watching and sticking around. And like I said, hopefully y'all learned something from this. Anyway, I'll get at you guys in the next one. There you go, buddy.